First, we're going to select the empty activity. Then we're going to name it, and we're going to select a minimum SDK. A lower number like API 24 supports more devices, while a higher number gives access to newer features but limits compatibility with older devices. First, we're going to download an Android emulator. Go to Device Manager, press the plus button, create a virtual device, and then we're going to download Pixel 9 because it has the most modern software. Main activity is the main starting point of our Android application. It connects our Kotlin code to the app interface. When the app opens, Android runs main activity, and main activity tells Jetpack Compose what should be displayed on the screen. Jetpack Compose is the tool we use to create the user interface. It allows us to build things we see on the screen like text, images, and buttons using Kotlin code instead of separate XML files. Jetpack Compose is the tool we use to create the user interface. It allows us to build things we can see on the screen, like text, images, and buttons using Kotlin code instead of separate XML layout files. Before Jetpack Compose, Android developers usually used XML layout files to create their app interfaces. These XML files described how the screen should look, such as where text, buttons, and images should be placed. XML layouts worked, but they could have become tedious because the design was separated from the Kotlin code. For example, if you created a button in an XML file, you would have to then go to your Kotlin file, reference the button, and then write the code that controls it. As apps became bigger, developers had to constantly switch between XML files and Kotlin files, which could make development slower and harder to manage. However, not all XML files are for layouts. Android Manifest XML is another XML file, but it has a different purpose. It is required for every Android app and is used for app configurations, such as declaring important information about the application. Jetpack Compose is an alternative to XML layout files for creating the user. In Android Studio, the Android version you download can mean two different things, the SDK and the emulator. The SDK is what Android Studio uses to build your app. It gives your project the tools it needs to compile. The emulator is a fake phone that lets you test your app. They are separate because one is for creating the app and the other is for running the app. At the top, we have our imports. Imports are like bringing tools into our file. The Gradle file downloaded these libraries, and imports allow us to use their features. The most important import for our Hello World example is import Android Compose Material 3 text. This gives us the text function, and that lets us display text on the screen. We also import Android X Activity Compose set content. This allows us to create our user interface using Jetpack Compose instead of XML layout file. The other important imports are used for things like layout, styling, and previews, but we don't need to focus on those. Now we have class main activity, compose activity, or component activity. This right here is the starting point of our app. When the user opens the app, Android starts here. Inside on create, we use set content. And this tells Android that we are creating the screen using Jetpack Compose. Then we call the greeting function. This runs our own function that creates the text. Inside the greeting function, text hello name, and then the text function displays the text on the screen. Since we put the name as world, the text will display hello world. The composable tag tells Jetpack Compose that this function creates part of the user interface. Finally, preview is only for Android Studio. It lets us see what our user interface looks like while coding without opening the app on an emulator. We're going to Gradle scripts. We're going to press build Gradle KTS. We're going to change the target and the compile SDK to 37. We gotta press sync now, and then when we run the app, it will show us hello world.